again that you may have missed. For example, the NYPD.
That's right. Lieutenant Vincent D'Augusta is the main character, yes? And, well, it's sort of, the book goes back to the roots of the series, which is Relic. Even though none of it takes place in the museum, it's Pendergast and D'Augusta working a case in a kind of a gothic, dark New York City.
Right, and it starts out, well, no, because it'll spoil it for you if I tell you, but let's say there's misdirection in the opening chapter and it doesn't go quite where you think it is, which I thought was exciting. And then why does Pendergast get involved with what's essentially a case for the NYPD? Because the FBI doesn't just show up. Wait, you went away.
Lean.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, you have to lean forward.
You're going to get a bill for my osteopath. Doug and I, in our last book, again, without giving too much away, we introduced the character we've been teasing people with for a long time, the character in the FBI who sort of protected Pendergast all these years, because he's the antithesis of a normal FBI agent. He just sort of gets away with murder, literally sometimes. We finally introduced him, and let's just say that Pendergast did not act in a way in the previous book that Obsidian Chamber that they had agreed on, and so his boss, to punish him, gives him this awful assignment, which seems like a terrible low-end case, and of course it turns out to be something that's, 5 or 6 chapters later is just down Pendergast's alley.
Very true. So
can I sit back now?
You can rest your back, right. So Doug and I were talking about the fact that they had to come up with a pretext to bring, a plausible pretext in order for Pendergast to come in and join Vincent. And what did you do?
Well, the pretext is that the murder, that a body is found in Queens, and the FBI Pendergast boss, who was interested in punishing Pendergast, trying to rein him in from his rogue behavior, comes up with a crazy theory that it's probably a mob killing and the body was transported from New Jersey. Very flimsy reason for the FBI to get involved. So Pendergast, in a very irritated mood, shows up at the crime scene, and they're very desultory, kind of looking around at the evidence, and then suddenly he sees something that interests him, and that's where the real case begins. So.
Well, I think we might mention that not only is Pendergast being sent there on punishment detail, but he's in pretty bad shape, because if you remember at the end of Obsidian, a person that he cares about has vanished from his home, and he's not holding up terribly well. So in a way, this case is going to be like therapy for him, right? To get him out of his funk and back alive?
That's right, and the case gets him out of his funk. It takes a few chapters, but I think by chapter 10, he is absolutely 100% committed in this case. He's fascinated by it and determined to solve it.
As I think Doug mentioned earlier, we were determined to make this book a standalone book, and that includes any kind of family entanglements or entanglements of another nature, whether that be romantic or otherwise. We wanted this to be a book that was purely an adventure that tested Pendergast to the ultimate and didn't get involved in extraneous or at least alternative storylines. Simply to go back to our roots, as Doug mentioned, with Relic, and also to be a book that could be picked up by totally anybody without, I hope, feeling any need to have read any of the earlier stories.
Well, to be realistic, an FBI agent should occasionally work a case to which he has no personal connection. He just is assigned the case because he's an FBI agent, right? That's what you
It's
did.
true, yeah. We didn't start out having his family or his past involved, but that it sort of crept up on us, and then it sort of took over several books in a good way. But we also realized that it's nice and it's refreshing to have a book that doesn't depend on any other ones at all for its narrative thrust.
So whose decision was it to bring a reporter who had a relatively minor role earlier on back into this? Because if you remember Relic, do you remember Mr. Smithback?
Yes.
And we know he's no more, right? So, who do we get?
Well, I don't actually remember whose idea that was, but it seemed like a good idea to have a reporter, because as this case progresses and more people are killed, New York City becomes, the press gets involved, it becomes an unbelievable zoo. And so we figured we needed a reporter to, bring in the press side of things. And we thought, well, who better than Bryce Harriman, who is Smithback's old nemesis at the New York Post. And Bryce Harriman is still active. He's now the star investigative reporter at the New York Post, but he's getting a little long in the tooth, and he's starting to feel pressure from some of the young Turks who've come in who are gunning for his position. And so he's pretty desperate for a good story, and boy, he thinks he's got a great story here, and boy, does he mess it up.
Well, that is funny you should say that, because I was about to say that one of the things Doug said while we were planning the book was, in all the prior books that Smithback appeared in, Bryce Harriman was, as Doug said, his nemesis, his competition, and Bryce always seemed like, a sad sack, somebody who just didn't have it together. And so Doug said, in this book, we got to make him a sympathetic character. We got to get more into his backstory, get into his head, see what makes him tick. And it is true that after all that work, you sort of knock out the ladder beneath him. But we did try and give Harriman his due in this book after treating him so abominably in so many earlier titles.
That was certainly kind of you. Now, does Vincent's main squeeze, does she play any part in the book, or is she off stage?
She plays a very minor role in the book. We're saving her for something else in the very near future. But again, as with Constance or Margot or Nora Kelly or Corey Swanson, this one really is, for the most part, Pendergast and DeAugusta doing what they do best.
Wow.
We hope.
Really back to your roots. I love that. So, Lincoln, you live in New Jersey and now Florida, but you've obviously really spent a lot of time in New York, and Doug, of course, has worked in New York. I think the book is has a wonderful feel for the city. You've got him in Queens, you've got those kids up in Queens, and then you've got the Upper East Side, and they're traveling all around. Was that fun for you guys to go back and revisit it? Because you live in Santa Fe and Maine, and nobody's in New York.
Well, I go to New York often. My daughter lives there, but the New York has changed a great deal since the time that Lincoln and I lived there. I mean, Manhattan in particular has become a city for just the 1%. It's become a city for the rich. And when I lived there, I could work at the Museum of Natural History. I was making $9,000 a year, and I was actually able to afford a crummy apartment on the Upper West Side on Riverside Drive. Now, I mean, that apartment would cost $3,000, $4,000 a month to rent. So New York has changed a lot, and the book deals with that. It really confronts head on this situation of New York, especially Manhattan, becoming a city just for the 1%, just for the rich and the privileged, and who live in $30 million apartments, and they're vacant 50 weeks out of the year and so forth. Link, do you want to add to that?
Not really. I think that's a pretty fair estimation of the attitude the book purveys. I think that Manhattan has certainly changed a great deal. I used to work there. I have a very small apartment there right now, where I don't spend much time. But it's become incredibly. It's so different now. When Doug and I wrote Relic, he didn't dare walk down a lot of the streets. And now, people are pushing baby carriages through parks I would never have gone in day or night. And so I think there's a very good side to that as well. The downside is it's extremely expensive to live there, and God help you if you try and drive through it, because so many streets are closed off for parades of pedestrians or whatever, that it's almost impossible.
I was there over Columbus Day weekend, and I wound up having to walk from the Metropolitan Museum down to 29th Street because A, there was the Columbus Day parade, but B, a new factor that's clogged up the city is Uber. Because, it's just everywhere. It's virtually impossible to drive. They're actually now thinking about, like London, charges and so forth. So did that, in the course of your investigation, were your guys impeded from moving around the city because of the traffic or the congestion? Magically in television there's a parking space in front of every place that you go, but in real life it doesn't work that way.
Well, it's interesting you should mention that, because there's a very crucial scene in the book where a company is doing work at a very beautiful townhouse on the Upper East Side, an alarm company. They're a security company, and the crime revolves around a parking space. And I can't go into any details because I don't want to issue any spoilers, but yes, the traffic situation in Manhattan is definitely part of the book.
It's funny you should mention a TV series where there's always a parking spot in front of wherever they need to go. I've often noticed that. I've often noticed there are absolutely no bathrooms anywhere in a TV series, but apparently people don't need them. So.
No, what I wonder about TV series is you see these people. One's got a job in a bookstore and the other one works for a museum, and they're living in a gorgeous 3-bedroom apartment on the Upper East Side with a terrace. It's like, wow, where did they get the money?
There's a crime going on there, embezzlement. So which one of you guys boned up on incredibly high-tech home security? Because I was truly dazzled by...
Doug.
Is that you?
I did a lot of research. I went online and oh my God, it's amazing what you can find online, because we had to equip this townhouse with the absolute ultimate. Actually, there's several settings that are very high security settings in the novel, and because the security is penetrated, we had to figure out how the security works and then how to penetrate it. And that was clever. I could find out all about the security, but then I had to think for myself, wow, how do you penetrate this security? So that took a lot of thinking.
No, it's really interesting. I was thinking that after, first you have to set it up and then you have to crack it in order to make this thing work. And I thought, wow, that really was a challenge. What fun.
I don't think it's giving too much away to say that the murders that take place in this story are all extremely difficult for whatever reason. It varies from murder to murder. They're all very, very hard to accomplish. And Doug and I are huge fans of books like the Thinking Machine stories and or the Locked Room stories of John Dixon Carr, where the crimes are seem to be impossible to have committed, let alone solved. And we thought this would be a great idea for our new book. And then we realized we blocked ourselves in, because now we have like 5 or 6 homicides we had to figure out to be each one to be a perfect crime.
Yeah, and some of the one security system is very old-fashioned. It's security guys and dogs. How do you get around that successfully?
I'm not going to say, because
no. Sometimes today, it seems like the best security is like write a note on a piece of paper or use an actual physical lock and key rather than, stuff that can be hacked. But I did think you set yourself some challenges, and it was also interesting to set up the Manhattan you're describing as for the 1% and basically set it up as a hunting field for a predator.
Yes, that's exactly right. I like that. I'm going to take that
You're
and
going to
use
steal
it at
that
the
line?
next book signing.
Okay. You guys have written so many books, and you're constantly changing, the kind of story that you're writing. How do you do that? Do you sit down one or two books and think about one or two books ahead?
Well, we do. We sometimes we'll come up with an idea, and then 10 years will pass before it finally matures. At other times, one of us will read another book. Like, for example, I just finished reading, I read a book about the Donner Party, and I was actually reading it because I had to review it for the New York Times Book Review. And I got to the end of the book, and I thought, this is such a wild, crazy story. There's got to be a novel in here somewhere. And so I called up Lincoln, I sent him a copy of the book, and we started talking about it, and we came up with this really, I think, a remarkably wonderful idea for a novel. Set in the present day, but based on that whole Donner thing back in the 1840s. So I can't...
And would it be too much for us to give away by saying what that book is going to be replacing?
Well, I think we can tell this group, but you will hear it first. You're hearing it first.
And all the people watching Facebook
Yes.
will do.
Well, never mind then. No, well, we have a character, Nora Kelly, who's an archaeologist, and it seemed like there were 3 Donner starvation camps, and one of them has never been found. This is our idea. And so Nora Kelly is hired or is with the Institute for Archaeology in Santa Fe, and she leads an expedition to find that Donner camp and excavate it. And so she does. And what they find is really quite remarkable and even more horrifying than you could imagine. And that's the first book in a new series starring Nora Kelly.
Which is really good news. However, for those of you who are fond of Gideon, it's not necessarily such good news.
Well, we've just completed the last book in the Gideon series. It's called The Pharaoh Key. It takes place mostly in the eastern desert of Egypt, which is a very interesting desert which lies between the Nile River and the Red Sea. It's not the Sahara Desert, it's on the other side of the Nile. A very mountainous, remote desert filled with ancient Egyptian and many undiscovered areas where there are ancient Egyptian tombs and things like that buried in the sand. So that's the setting, and it's going to be the last Gideon novel.
Yes, it's going to be definitively the final Gideon novel. No more are coming out at all unless it sells lots of copies and a movie is made, and then the revive.
Never say never. We've learned that about you novelists. Now, we haven't worked out the logistics, but that book, the Gideon book, will be out in June, so we'll figure out how to do that. But I think the Nora Kelly book sounds like a lot of fun too. So
Well, it is. And then I hope I'm not giving away too much, Link. Should I say who else is coming into the book at a certain point?
Go ahead.
Well, at a certain point, a very young freshman FBI agent enters the picture. Special Agent Corey Swanson.
So it really is an ensemble cast, and they just kind of keep permutating. Now, if it's an Egyptian setting, Lincoln, does it depend in part on the research you did for your enigmologist book? One I love so, where they're off in the Nile marshes. And...
Yes. It's funny you should mention that, because at first I was worried that it would, but my book, The Third Gate, takes place in the Sud, which is like this horrible wasteland of swampy, bottomland that goes on and on forever. Whereas the Gideon book takes place in the maybe Doug can pronounce it better than I can, but it's a prescribed zone of the triangular Hababib triangle.
Halayib Triangle.
In southern Egypt, which is just the polar opposite, is a dry desert, but it isn't the kind of desert that you would think about necessarily as being Egyptian, because it's full of stone and sharp, jagged canyons and wadis and tall mountains, and it's a really harsh, very forbidding environment. Forbidding as was in my solo book, but very, very different. And so we had a chance to find two very different Egypts, basically, in the two stories.
So while we have you on this subject, catch us up on your solo books. You've written 5, right?
7, believe it or not.
7? Oh, sorry.
I think. I could be wrong, but I believe it's 7.
Okay.
The last one was Full Wolf Moon.
Right.
Which I wrote sitting out on the lanai here last year, and Jeremy Logan is alive and well, and as it so happens, he's in New York City also, and something rather dreadful is happening at a university down south of Wall Street, where New Amsterdam used to be, and you'll hear more soon, I hope.
Well, I hope so too, because I found him to be a fascinating character, but I like the different places you go. The Gilded Mansion in Newport, the wilds of Egypt, somewhere out in the wilderness.
I try very hard to make sure each book of his is in a very different and remote place, which is what makes this one, the new one, so unusual, because it's in the middle of New York City, and yet somehow Jeremy finds a way to be much more alone than he'd like to be, let's put it that way.
Well, we'll look forward to talking to you about it, and by then we'll figure out the sounds, so you're not going to have this conversation. So, a question for both of you. Since you write together, you seem to have achieved a kind of third voice, not your voice, his voice, but a new voice. When you go back and write your own books, either one of you, how do you go back into your own voice when you've been doing the third voice?
Well, I can't speak for Doug, but for me, we've written so many novels together, and he's written so many chapters, and I have as well, that it doesn't really feel any different. I think perhaps I might shade the story a little bit more towards, I don't know, the descriptive or the conversational, and Doug might shade it more towards the action or the humor or whatever, just because those are our natures and that's the way we write. And, a chapter that I would write for a Pendergast book, Doug might take stuff out, my little, what's the term, Doug?
Little darlings?
Little darlings?
Yeah, you can massacre your darlings.
He's got an unerring eye for taking out my favorite lines. I get the chapter back and I'm looking through and saying, where is that thing? And so I have nobody to sort of rein me in except my editor when it's me by myself. And Doug, is unfettered also, and left to his own devices, runs amok in his own solo novel. But beyond that, I think the techniques aren't that different.
I find this so interesting that since you started out as his editor for Doug's first nonfiction, Dinosaurs in the Attic, that you are not still in that role entirely. That I would think it would be hard when you've been in that position of authority over somebody, i.e. the editor, to become a colleague. How did you do that?
Well, I think Doug would have bridled if I tried to assert my authority over him too much, and in fact he did bridle many occasions, as did I. The writing burdens were not shared equally early on. Doug did more writing than I did by a great extent. In fact, in Relic, I probably didn't write more than 5 or 6 chapters. Completely on my own, although I rewrote his significantly in places. Not necessarily in a bad way, just,
No, it was awful what he did. It was just just butchered my Shakespearean prose. To dragged it down into the mud.
Well, it was,
Doug, look into the ball. Look into the ball. Well, I'm speaking now. But over time we did, because I always liked writing when I was young, and being an editor kind of stamped that flame out of me, just working too hard at other people's books. But over time the relationship really developed and changed. So the way we work now is quite different. And I think if you were to go back and read Relic, I haven't tried this myself, and then read one of the much more new books, you'd probably be surprised at how Relic was a lot more, not rough-edged to speak, but self-indulgent perhaps, in a way that I'm pleased with. But,
I've always thought of it as off the chain. And then you kind of came back. I thought Cabinet of Curiosity was the book for me, which was the first real fusion, of the whole thing, and you could kind of see what was going to happen from there on. I loved that book, Yeah. I mean,
I'm sorry. That was the first book that I remember getting back home, and I was in New York, and a bookseller said to me, we're really getting a lot of buzz on this book, and no bookseller had said that to me before, and. Somehow Cabin just it got traction at either the right time, or the zeitgeist was right, or maybe the book itself was just pretty good. Whatever the reason, it really made a huge change and it was also the book that brought Pendergast back. Before that we were writing Thunderhead and Riptide, etc. We didn't really think of bringing him back. I don't quite know what prompted us to do so. But it was in retrospect, it was a good move.
It was. So, Doug, when you're writing nonfiction, do you change? Does your voice change? Does your process change?
Well, it does. It changes a lot, because with nonfiction, I have to stop lying. I have to start telling the truth. I mean, with a novel, you're just dreaming it all up. And with nonfiction, you have to absolutely be, truthful. Everything has to be absolutely accurate, which is good in a way because there's a framework there for me to work from, which a novel doesn't have, but bad in the sense that I can't, if I don't like something, I can't change it. So those are really I think the differences.
Well, I understand that part, but does your narrative voice change as well? Do you become I don't know what I want to say. How many of you read Lost City of the Monkey God? I loved that book, and it felt to me as though I were just. I mean, it was true, but it also read like a novel.
It's really hard for me to assess my own writing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess I'd ask the audience, my readers, is there a difference between my nonfiction book, The City of the Monkey God, for example, and one of my solo novels in the writing style? I mean, what do you think? Yes or no? No?
One thing I can tell you is that Doug is a natural-born raconteur, and so at dinner or whatever, you can often see him telling a story of his life and embellishing it slightly, probably, but he's extremely good at telling these stories and knowing just how to put the punch. And these are true stories, just how to build them up, and when the punchline comes. And so I think I envy him a book like Monkey God, not the tramping through the jungle and avoiding the fer de lances and stuff. I don't envy him that at all. But when it comes time to writing it, because he has the gift of a storyteller, and he can apply that as if he's sitting around the campfire with you, telling his story of what happened to him down in Honduras. And I think it's a natural talent he has. And so if his voice is different, the voice you're reading is the voice of Doug himself, just telling you his story.
Yeah, that's what I strive for in a nonfiction book, is to not lecture the reader, not sort of didactically shove information down the reader's throat, but I try to feel that we're sitting around a campfire or the dinner table or whatever, and I'm just telling a story. It's as simply as possible, but with excitement and interest in it.
And you did superbly, which is why it's been 5 months on the New York Times bestseller list, which is very exciting, isn't it?
Well, it's the biggest best-selling book I've ever had, so I hope it continues.
However, you and Lincoln together, when we did this the first time in August of 2012, had a #1 bestseller. Which Pendergast was it, Lincoln?
It was The Dance of Death, I believe.
Isn't that great? He's got the whole work right there on the wall. He can count.
Actually, I'm missing a bunch. If somebody wants to send me a few, I'd appreciate it. just kidding.
So, well, it's been interesting. We've had, Lincoln, how many bestsellers in a row have we written? 23, I think.
Why are you asking me? I think it's about... I think it's about 10.
No, it's 20. It's over 20 bestsellers in a row.
Bestsellers?
Yeah.
Oh, maybe so.
Well, both our solo books and the joint books. I'm including both.
Oh, okay, yeah, then you're probably right. Yeah.
All right. You guys have got such a big body of work, and it's so diverse and varied. It's interesting to talk about it. We know that you have a new book coming then for Jeremy, the enigmologist, about more. And what are you writing on your own now, as a solo?
Well, nothing really. Nothing. My publisher is very anxious that I write another nonfiction book because Monkey God is doing so well. And I've got some ideas, but I'm not ready to talk about them, unfortunately.
We're really, we have our hands full writing the new Pendergast novel, which features, let's say, a reincarnation of a beloved character from our previous Pendergast books. And we're also writing the Nora Kelly book Doug mentioned, so we really have our hands full at the moment.
Reincarnation of a beloved character? What?
Oh, look, it's the surprise plot element.
Does the word cowlick mean anything to you, Doug?
Maybe at this point.
Cowlick.
Oh, cowlick. Oh, yes.
Oh. Well, I think on that note, we should maybe have a few questions from the audience before we have to break up this wonderful evening. Any of you have a question that you would like to ask either Doug or Lincoln? There we go, you choose.
Yes, sir.
Now, when you two first developed Pendergast, who had the most input of the character being so eccentric and strange and but awesome at the same time? And are we ever going to get to see Lincoln in Phoenix, Arizona at all?
It's a question I've asked every year.
So the question is, when we first developed Pendergast, who had this input into him, making him such a strange and mysterious and character? And the second question is, are we ever going to see Lincoln in Phoenix for real?
Road trip.
I spent all my summers as a kid in Phoenix and Flagstaff, and went to school at a boarding school in between the two of them. So I'm afraid you kind of caught me at a bad time of my life. I was there for many years, but I do want to come back, although it might mean having to visit Doug in New Mexico. So there are good parts and bad parts to it. I would like to come out to Scottsdale. It's been way, way, way too long, and you've been too kind to me all these years, watching me on a screen. You know, you deserve to see more than that.
It would be wonderful. It would be a road trip from Florida. Maybe it's less daunting to drive here from Florida than from New Jersey.
Oh, yeah.
That's right. I could go to the Panhandle, Louisiana, and then go into Texas somewhere and never be heard from again.
Did you answer the first part of the question?
No, I haven't answered the first. Well, the first part. Well, when Lincoln and I were starting Relic, I wrote the first chapters, and I sent them to Lincoln. And he called me up and he said, "Oh, these are great chapters. These are great, but these two cops you have, one is Irish and one is Italian. You know, they're rough outside with a heart of gold on the inside. They're really the same character. And I think we ought to put those two together meld them into one character, and then I think we ought to come up with a detective who's just really different, something that no one's ever thought of before. And by this time I was really irritated. And I said, with dripping sarcasm, I said, oh yeah, let's like an albino from New Orleans. This is a true story. And there's a silence, and Lincoln said, I think we can work with that. So we started talking, I swear in 15 minutes, Pendergast was standing in front of us. He's not an albino, he's just very pale. He looks like a corpse. And he wears black, of course. So.
Another question?
Yes.
Whatever happened to the possibility of Pendergast on screen?
Oh, that's a very sad story. Paramount, because they bought the relic and made a movie out of it, they own the character rights to Pendergast, even though they cut him from the film. You idiots. I mean, he wasn't cut until the very end. He was in each draft of the screenplay, and each screenplay we saw, each draft, he was there less and less until finally he disappeared. But they still own the character, and so that's why no one else has been able to do anything with him. And finally Paramount said, oh, we're going to do a television series called Pendergast. And Gail Ann Hurd was the producer. She's did Aliens and The Walking Dead, and I mean she's a super producer. And they hired a fabulous screenwriter who wrote Black Swan and a bunch of movies. And he wrote
the first season was going to be the story of Cabinet of Curiosities spread out over season 1.
Yeah. So anyway, well, Lincoln, tell.
No, go ahead. You're doing a good job. You're working well.
Oh, thank you, teacher. So this fellow wrote a pilot, and he wrote a story Bible, and he spun out the series, and the people at Paramount loved it. All the executives loved it. It went through many layers of people. They all loved it, and it went out, and there was all this excitement about it. And then all of a sudden, it was killed. Just boom. Some top executive just didn't like it, and of course, we're never going to know why. We're never going to, no one is ever going to explain to us who this person was and what he didn't like. Obviously, a man of no literary taste, semi-illiterate buffoon, but that's sort of the way Hollywood works, unfortunately. So it's as my father-in-law would say, the project is as dead as a mackerel. One more question, yes.
Well, having the last name of Pendergast, I'm curious as to how you came up with that name, if there's any story behind that.
Well, damn, Lincoln, how did we come up with the name Pendergast?
That was all I can say is that is a shrouded mystery is how we developed him, except that I think we meant to write Prendergast, which is a more common name, and somehow we bastardized it. And I think you came up with the name, though, in that fit you had when I complained about the two policemen.
Does AXL, did that come at the same time?
No, we wrote 4 novels, or 3 novels with Pendergast, and then Lincoln and I looked at each other and said, we don't know his first name. We don't know anything about him. We've got to come up with a first name. So I think it was in Brimstone where his first name is. Pendergast has to show his ID to somebody. The person's looking at it. Aloysius, what's that? So obviously Pendergast is not fond of his given name.
Yeah, Aloysius was my contribution. That much I remember.
And then the XL. Well, I'm not sure that we've really revealed. The X stands for Xingu, which is the name of a river in South America, where a Pendergast ancestor named Percival Fawcett disappeared in the 1920s. If any of you have read The Lost City of Z or seen the movie, you know all about that history. And the L...
There's some argument about what that stands for.
Anyway.
I think it stands for Lincoln, personally. But,
An obvious choice, right? Do you have a question before we sign off for any of us?
I just want to thank you all for supporting us over all these many books, you've made it possible for us, to do what we like most, which is writing these Pendergast books and these Gideon books, and it entertains us. We wouldn't do it if we didn't enjoy it, and we like nothing better than to get questions from you, because that shows that you're really, you get into the stories, so we're not telling them just to ourselves, we're telling them to a group of people who follow along and often influence us. A lot of the things that we hear from readers, grab Doug after I vanish in a puff of smoke and tell him what you like and don't like about our books, because that really influences what we do going forward. We listen to our readers. So thank you very much, and thank you for having us and hosting us. And Robert Peters, everybody. Isn't he wonderful?
That's very nice, Lincoln. I hope that when your new book for Jeremy comes out, it'll just be you and me, right? Down here doing this. Unless, of course, unless you decide to take your road trip, but maybe we should save that up for Pendergast. It would really be fun to see you. I sometimes think that Lincoln's just an electronic thing that lives here. Although I have met him. I have actually met Lincoln in New York one time.
Come to Tampa tomorrow and you'll find out differently.
I'm going to New Zealand. Sorry, wrong direction, but another time. Anyway, thank you very much, Lincoln, for coming and joining us.
Thank you, partner.
And I want to give a shout out to the gentleman that came up and saved us with the Bluetooth thing. So, thank you very, very much for doing that. We have something we like to do before we all stand up and get out of our seats and fold them up and lean them against the wall, which is to give away a book to those of you who have purchased a book. You should have a number inside your book if you're a book buyer.